Hi guys, welcome back to Toon Blend 3D. Now we will continue the texturing process for this Low Poly Chibi Knight, so make sure you have watched the previous modeling part. Okay, let's get started. Next, we will start painting. Switch to the texture painting layout first. Here, we will use the Ucupaint add-on, so make sure you have already installed it. You can visit the add-on creators channel, Ucupumar. You can also support it directly by clicking the heart icon. By supporting it, we help the development of this add-on. We should really appreciate it, since this add-on is free, so let's support it. Now, let's start painting. Begin in object mode. Select one mesh object. Here, I select the body. Select Quick Ucupaint Node Setup. Then choose Emission and enable Alpha. Here, you can also rename the material. Before continuing, go to the Render tab, then Color Management. Change View Transform to Standard, and set Look to Medium-High Contrast. Next, press A to select all meshes and making sure the body mesh is selected last. Then press Ctrl+L and choose Link Material. This makes all meshes use the same material. Next, I add a reference color palette. You can also find it on Pinterest account from this channel. Then, rename this reference. Then select the character mesh. Here, I select the body. Switch to texture painting mode, go to the Tool tab, then Color Palette. Here, you can name the palette. Next, add colors from the reference palette. Press Shift+X, then move the pointer to the first color in the reference palette. Blender will automatically pick the color under the pointer. Then add the color by clicking the plus icon in the color palette. Or, you can directly press Shift+X and left-click on the color in the reference palette. Then Blender will automatically pick and add the color to the palette. After that, create a new layer. Click the plus icon, choose New Image, then rename it to Base Color. Set the resolution size, or customize it based on your needs. Here, I use a 2048 resolution because it's easier to downscale later when baking or exporting the final texture, rather than increasing the resolution, which won't improve the texture quality. Then click OK. You can also enable wireframe to make texturing easier. Next, focus on the body by pressing /key. Then switch to Edit mode. Select the armor on the body using Face Selection mode and press L. Go back to texture painting mode and choose the armor color from the color palette. Change the brush type to fill, then enable the mask icon at the top. This mask ensures that only faces selected in edit mode can be painted. Left-click in the texture paint viewport and the color will automatically fill the selected faces. Continue applying colors to other faces using the same method. After finishing the fill colors, we will start creating basic patterns using a brush. Here, I use the Paint Hard brush. Change the stroke type from space to line. This makes it easier to draw straight lines. Press F to adjust the brush size. Left-click, then hold Alt to create straight or 45-degree angled lines. Continue shaping the line patterns. To switch between color 1 and color 2, press X in the viewport area. You can also go to Edit mode, select the face area you want to texture, then press Shift+H to focus on the selected faces. After that, return to texture painting mode and continue applying the texture. After finishing the texturing, go back to Edit mode and press Alt+H to unhide the faces. Then return to texture paint mode. When you feel it's done, rotate the body mesh to check if there are areas that still lack color or patterns, especially on the lower parts like the feet. Then press /key to exit focus mode. Move the mouse pointer to the head mesh and press Alt+Q to switch directly to another object without leaving texture painting mode. Continue applying colors using the fill method, then move on to the plume mesh. Here, we will paint it directly in the 2D UV texture. If some faces look distorted or the texture does not match the 2D UV texture, check it again using the UV grid checker. Adjust the vertices until the texture looks correct and inspect it from multiple views. Next, continue creating the plume texture. We can also use line stroke on the eraser brush. Then set the alpha value to 0. This makes the plume look like it has many layers, even though it's actually just a flat mesh using texture transparency. After that, continue applying the base color. We move to the upper part of the hand. We try to make the hand look like it has fingers by creating boundary lines to define each finger. Finally, do an overall check. Disable overlays to see the character mesh clearly without wireframe and without needing to turn off wireframe mode itself. Next, we will create a square or diamond Gambeson pattern for the pants and the character's arms. Add a new layer and choose Generated Wave, then click OK. After that, add a mask layer and choose New Color Attribute Mask. Change the color from white to black, then click OK. Go to Edit Mode and enable Overlays again. Select the body faces by pressing L in Face Selection mode. Then choose White in the Fill Mask Attribute option. With this, the wave layer will only appear on the areas filled with white. Next, adjust the wave pattern settings. Set band direction to Y, profile to SAW, and adjust the scale as needed. Here, I set it to 12. Then go to Vector, set rotation to 45 degrees, and change the color channel to Dodge. Next, add a color ramp modifier, set the alpha to full, and adjust the color ramp so the wave pattern blends nicely with the base color. After that, duplicate this generated wave layer. Set the rotation to -45 degrees so both patterns form a diamond or Gambeson pattern. Then, flip the color ramp. Next, add a new bake layer called Paint Base. Set the resolution, set the margin to extend, and 4 samples, one is optional and enough for this example. And for the bake device, choose whatever you prefer, either CPU or GPU compute. Here, I'm using GPU compute. Then click OK. After that, set the color channel to soft light. And next, add an Ambient Occlusion bake layer. Set it the same way as the paint base layer, then click OK. Set the color channel to soft light. Then continuing add a color ramp, and adjust the brightness and contrast so it looks more comfortable to the eye. Then, add a generated edge detect layer. Change the color channel to Dodge, and adjust the radius. Once it looks good, bake the layer the same way as the paint base layer. Next, add a mask layer and choose New Color Attribute Mask. Set the color type to white, then click OK. Go to the plume mesh, switch to Edit mode, select all faces, and fill them with black in the mask attribute. Do the same process for the Ambient Occlusion and paint base layers. Then, check the entire mesh to see if there are any issues. For For example, here we can see a line on top of the helmet even though we never painted it. This happens because of a baked layer result. To find out which layer causes the issue, hide and unhide the layers one by one. Here, we find that the ambient occlusion layer is the cause. To fix it, we first need to understand why the line appears. The line happens because there is another mesh nearby. So when baking the layer, it is affected by the mesh shape, not the painted texture. To fix this, hide the plume mesh in both viewport and render. Then rebake the ambient occlusion layer, making sure another mesh is selected, not the plume mesh. After that, we can see the line is gone. However, there may still be other small lines. If they are minor, we can fix them by blending, using the smudge brush or blur brush if needed. Here, we can also see a small dot in the mesh. This might happen because the fill brush on the base color layer was not evenly applied. Fix this by using a hard paintbrush with the same color as the helmet. Paint over those areas in the base color layer. Next, create a gradient layer using a new image layer. Use the same resolution as the base color layer. Make sure this gradient layer is placed at the top of all current layers. First, change the brush to fill, then switch the color picker from color to gradient. Start with the plume mesh. Left-click to place the first gradient point, then drag the gradient line in the desired direction. The first click represents the first or leftmost color in the gradient, and the end point represents the last color. Make sure you understand how it works, and repeat until it feels right. Use black as the shadow color and white as the lighting color. Then change the color channel to soft light to see the gradient effect directly. After that, move to other meshes using Alt+Q. You can also use masks to apply gradients to specific faces on each mesh. If blocky artifacts appear when applying the gradient, fix them by changing the view direction or zooming in or out. This usually resolves the blocky artifact issue. As for why this happens, I'm not entirely sure either, but this explanation comes from Copilot. Continue this process until you reach the body. Use masks for each different part of the body mesh, such as armor, clothing, and other areas. We create a new image layer for detail painting, and we use the soft light channel. Start from the visor. Create a whole pattern using a hard paintbrush with line stroke. Use Shift+Z to enable wireframe preview so we can still see the reference even in texture paint mode. Continue creating patterns based on the reference. If you ask why not do this directly on the base color layer, yes, that is possible, but the black color will become pure black if painted directly on the base color. It can still be adjusted later, so just choose the method that fits your needs. Next, create sharp shapes using the eraser. Use line stroke, aim toward the center from outside the circle, and press Alt to get a 45-degree angle. After that, press X to switch the color to white for highlights. Lower the strength, then follow the edges of the pattern. Use the blur brush to blend the corners where lines meet. Continue adding detail patterns on the helmet. Create a line from the top of the helmet, then add highlights on both sides. Try adding an extra plate pattern. For bolts, change the stroke to drag dot. This makes it easy to create circular shapes and move them around. Then continue with the ear circles. Move to the big chain behind the helmet and apply the same steps as before. After that, move to the shoulder armor on the body. Create the same pattern as on the visor. Continue to the gloves. Make the armor feel more volumetric by adding shadows and highlights. Next, move to the legs. Go to Edit mode, select the leg faces using L in Face Select mode, then press Shift plus H to focus only on those faces. Try creating lines so the armor looks layered. Start drawing from the right view, then switch to the front view. You will notice the line is not straight. Try again from the left view. Temporarily disable Display Viewport Mirror, then continue drawing the line. Check again from the front view. You can see the left side looks straight, but the right side does not. To fix this, select both faces and press Ctrl plus T to triangulate the faces. Remove the previous line and redraw it. Now the line should look better. This step really affects the result. Next, look at the sole of the shoe. It looks too bright even though it is on the bottom. This might come from a baked layer effect. To fix this, find the layer by hiding and unhiding layers, then go to Edit mode and add a black mask to that layer. If you see strange lines like this, try removing them using the blur or smudge brush. After that, go back to Edit mode. Press Alt plus H to unhide all faces and enable Display Viewport Mirror again. Continue to the belt. Let's make the gem look more interesting. First, we set up the masking on the paint base and edge detect layers. Then create a black to white gradient from bottom to top. After that, draw a black line around the gem, followed by a white line around the black one, so the gem looks more volumetric. Move to the next gem and apply the same method. But this time, create the gradient manually, since this is only a texture pattern on flat faces, not an actual gem shape. Continue adding details to the other gems. Next, manually create a gradient effect on the gold stripes on the clothes to make them look more attractive. Lower the brush strength to make it easier to control light and dark reflections. Use blur and smudge brushes to smooth the gradient. Then add black shadow lines along the edges of the gold lines so they pop and feel more volumetric. Continue applying this to the other gold lines. You can also add scratch details on the armor. For example, on the shoulder armor, draw a black line, then add a white line along its edge. Remove the sharp line edges using the blur or smudge effect. Next, we move on to the plume mesh. We could paint the line details manually, but that would be tiring and not very clean. So instead, we'll use a generated wave layer. After that, add a new image mask layer so the effect only applies to the plume. Change the color channel to soft light, then adjust the scale, rotation, and profile to get the look you want. Add a mask to the straight bone area of the plume, then add a color ramp modifier and adjust it so the colors blend better with the surrounding colors. You can also add a generated magic mask layer to give variation to the wave pattern. Adjust the scale and blend of this mask. Then, add shadow using a soft paintbrush on the detail layer. For the straight bone pattern on the plume, you can paint it manually or use another generated wave layer like before. If you want to change the plume color without affecting the base color, create a new layer. Add a new image layer. Use the fill brush, switch the color picker to gradient, and choose the gradient colors you want. Apply the gradient color to the plume. Then change the color channel of the layer to color. Add an image mask so the straight bone area of the plume is not affected. If the generated wave layer still looks too contrasty, lower its value. Then, to easily adjust the gradient color later, add a hue saturation modifier to the layer. Now you can tweak the gradient color just by adjusting the hue parameter. After that, add final shadow and highlight details. You can disable the hue saturation modifier if you no longer need it. The value of this layer is not limited to 1, you can increase it to 2 or even higher, depending on the look you want. Move the detail and gradient layers to the top. Layer order affects the final result, so make sure they are placed correctly. Finally, fine-tune the wave and gradient parameters if the result still feels off. Next, let's clean up and soften any rough areas or dark stains caused by baked layers using the smudge brush. For example, under the pants here you can see a dark line, so we smooth it out using smudge and blur brushes. We can also use the smudge brush to create a painterly effect either on the paint base layer or on the ambient occlusion layer that we baked earlier. If you want to revert the result, you can always rebake the layer, so make sure you save the project regularly. After finishing the texturing, the next step is baking all layers into a single texture. Click the gear icon on the color channel and choose Bake Color Channel. Set the texture resolution. Here we try 512 pixels. Set the margin to extend and click OK. You can see the texture still looks fine, but it becomes blurry when zoomed in. We can go back to layer mode and then return to bake mode. Now let's rebake again with a custom resolution of 256 pixels. Here the texture starts to look blurry. Then we rebaked again and changed the interpolation from linear to closest. Now the texture looks sharper, but pixel blocks appear along the pattern edges. Next, enable anti-aliasing samples and set the value to 2. The result looks cleaner and keeps the pattern shape more accurately. Then try changing the interpolation to cubic. The result looks similar to linear, but more blurry and very soft. Next, try closest interpolation again with 512 pixel resolution. However, on the face seam area, it's still visible. We try increasing bake samples to 101,000. But it doesn't really fix it. Instead, we increase the resolution to 1024 pixels and reduce the samples back to 1. And now the texture looks smoother. If we go back to linear interpolation, the pattern lines become smoother. But when we lower the resolution back to 512 pixels, the texture becomes blurry again. Here are some comparisons of different bake parameters we tried. In the end, I choose 1024 resolution with linear interpolation. After that, save the baked texture image and make sure to use PNG format. Next, I'll show you how to edit the baked texture using external painting software. Go to Edit, then Preferences, then in the Application tab under Image Editor, choose the software you want to use. Here, I'm using Krita because it's free and has many useful features. Browse to the folder and select the application file with EXA format. Alternatively, you can right-click the Krita shortcut, open Properties, copy the target location, paste it into Blender, and remove the quotation marks. Then save Preferences or enable Auto-Save Preferences. Go to the Image Editor layout, then Image, and choose Edit Externally. Krita should open automatically and display the texture image you saved. If it doesn't open, try opening Krita manually and click Edit Externally again. Once it's open in Krita, we can start editing the texture, especially on the plume. However, we don't know the UV wireframe boundaries yet, so we need to extract the UV layout. Go back to UV editing, select all meshes in object mode, then go to edit mode and disable UV sync selection. Then press A to select all faces, then go to the UV tab and choose export UV layout. Then give it a name, then make sure the format is PNG and use the same resolution as the baked texture image. You can also adjust the UV fill opacity here. Then go back to Krita and open the UV image. After that, copy it and paste it into the texture file as a new layer. Lower the layer opacity so it doesn't cover the texture too much. Then we add the same color palette as the character, so the plume colors match and feel consistent with the character. Now we're ready to start editing the plume texture. After finishing the plume texturing, save the image. Then go back to the Texture Paint viewport in Blender and press Alt+R to refresh the image texture. Or you can also go to Image and choose Reload. Make sure the color palette layer is hidden. If you want to go back to a previous texture version, you can rebake the texture again and save it and do the same process as before. You can also add a subdivision surface modifier to the plume mesh to make it look smoother. However, keep in mind that this will also double the number of vertices on the plume. With this, the character texturing is finished. Thank you for watching. In the next part, we will continue with rigging and animation for the character. See you in the next video.